As someone who has been playing basically since the game came out,
I don't feel so good.
I tend to look back and remember some of the abilities that have been reworked or downright removed over the years. Every time a classic event comes out, I spend hours basically just trying out the older version of our heroes and questioning why said abilities were removed in the first place and if said decision was valid or they could still work in the modern version of Overwatch. With the anniversary event currently going, the script was made a month ago, I'm sorry. I thought it was a good idea to look back at some of those to try and explain why they were removed and if there were other alternatives Blizzard could have come up with to adjust them without fully deleting them, which, as a small spoiler, is certainly not the case for most of them. One of the original abilities that came out with the game's launch is Symmetra's photon shield, not to be confused with her photon barrier. Interestingly, it's also the first removed ability in the history of the game, which is why I decided to talk about it first. You're able to try it out in Overwatch Classic whenever it's available, but if you didn't, this ability was the way Symmetra could support allies, as she was originally in that role, by providing 25 permanent shield HP that would automatically regenerate when out of combat like any other shield HP does. It had only a second of cooldown, could be placed on every ally at the same time, and only expiring on death, so essentially it meant that her team had passively 25 more HP for the entirety of the game. It wasn't interactive nor fun to use, while being way more powerful than it may seem at first. 25 HP at that point was over 10% of the total HP of most heroes, and it could change a ton of breakpoints that were crucial to some of them. For example, suddenly Cass couldn't kill with a body shot plus a headshot, which was a pretty common occurrence. It's obvious the devs had a very different vision for the game when working on kits like hers, but it was really worrying even when it came out and had no proactive or use case beside placing it on everyone at the start of a round, which at that point could just be a passive rather than taking the slot of an entire ability. She was pretty much a joke of a hero during that time, so you don't see many people talking about it like they do with other removed abilities. In the end, Symmetra's kit as a whole was a mess, and she had to be reworked shortly after this, with this ability turning into her shield generator, which doesn't exist anymore either. But I will talk about it more in depth in a sequel to this video if it gets enough support. There really isn't much discussion to have about Photon Shield despite being the first removed ability, as it is a relic of what's basically a different game and would never feel satisfying in the modern version of the game. There's a reason they don't bring it back even in for fun modes.
Know your fucking place, trash!
Another deleted classic ability from the other original builder of Overwatch is Torbjörn's armor packs. Somewhat similar to Sim's shields, armor packs, well, provided 75 armor to anyone that walked to them, including yourself. This ability didn't have a cooldown, but rather a resource that needed to be filled to be able to use it, which to be fair was a bit more interesting than Sim's, and resource mechanics like this would be used for other abilities in the future, like Moira's healing. Unlike Sim, you could also potentially use them mid-fight, and the value was incredibly high if you could get enough scrap consistently, with a big if. The issue is that to do so you had to get close to the corpse of enemies, which, as a character with no mobility and pretty much no defensive option, it wasn't something you could go for in most situations. It did feel over time very slowly, but that would mean you would use them before a fight started, throwing them to your allies and as much as you could around you to sustain yourself. It was also another setup ability with not much going for it, so it wasn't that fun to use and just a relic of how Overwatch was originally intended to be played. It also had the problem of relying on your team paying attention to setbacks and actually picking them up, which just didn't happen most of the time. Even today this is a problem with Lifeweaver seed perk, so imagine when players had even less idea how to play the game at all. His ability got deleted and replaced with Overload, which still allowed Torb to get a boost of armor, but with a bit more gameplay to it, as it was a cooldown with a duration, so you're rewarded for using it at the correct time, moving away from the resource system and supportive outputs, and allowing Torb to have some nuance to his gameplay loop and a bit more power for himself. This ability was also modernized as brick packs, which not only fit more to an actual support hero, but also didn't have the issue of needing an ally to actively remember about them, so there isn't much need to bring them back elsewhere aside Stadium or other arcade modes. Oh yeah, Brick used to be able to provide armor. Good times. Our first deleted ability from the transition from Overwatch 1 to its sequel, Doom Rising Uppercut. This ability, as the name implies, launched Doom and any enemy in range upwards, which will allow Doom and its team to easily finish off any enemy suspended in the air, which for multiple years actually would remove full control of their character for 3 seconds while descending, which sounds crazy, and it was. If you ever played the Overwatch Moth Classic mode, you probably played against Doomfist repeatedly and would suffer the bullshit his entire kit was. Well, whenever it actually worked. Since he was so buggy on release, he was artificially a lot worse than he should have. As a DPS, this ability allowed him to reliably begin encounters as long as he got on top of you, which was reasonable as he had to waste other parts of his kit to get on top of you. But since he was a DPS, Blizzard could allow themselves to just pump him with movement abilities to encourage combos and a reasonable combat flow for a mostly melee DPS. Obviously that didn't turn out that well, but the intention was there. The reason why it was removed when they turned Doom into a tank is due to also leaving Doom wide open in the air, which on his new role with not as much burst damage, as well as being the only frontline, would make him an easy target to enemy CC, and with no block meant he could get burst down as fast as anyone caught in it. I honestly think it could have provided Doom with damage or crowd control reduction while in the air to reduce the potential drawbacks while still supporting the highly mobile playstyle that Power Block just seems to disrupt in my opinion, as well as removing the combo character identity he used to have, but I understand why this change had to be made on a surface level. You can still use it in Stadium, where it's an extra ability available from a selectable power. You'll still have access to your block to defend yourself while in the air, but it would also be nice to see a version of Doomfist with uppercut that isn't insanely broken and loaded with stuns. What was Gushue cooking? God, I am so tired of this ability. At the dawn of time, Overwatch, Hanzo was popularly considered a throw pick, in big part due to having one of the most inconsistent and downright terrible abilities in the entire game in Scatter Arrow. This ability was an arrow that would split up and bounce randomly a bunch of times, or most popularly used to throw it at an Orisa's feet, one-shotting her. As broken and funny as it seems, realistically this was its only use case, and the spread and randomness of the ability meant it would most likely miss entirely or just hit one or two arrows even on a closed space. Not only that, but Overwatch maps don't really have many of these spaces where it would kind of work, and the ones that do, like Anubis or Hanamura, have mostly been taken out of the game. It was replaced by Storm Arrow on his rework, which fits much better with his gameplay loop, allowing him to have an ability that is more reliable than his primary to finish people off rather than being even less predictable. Why did I make that comment at the start? Cause for some reason, both the player base and the devs have a love boner with this Forsaken mess. Not only does it come back on Classic, but it has been brought back at least 5 times on different game modes, as well as being kind of a major perk now. That guess what? No one picks, cause it sucks. And even if it was powerful, anyone would rather pick the reliable choice. There is a reason it was taken away, and no matter how many times they bring it back, it's still bad. It should never come back to the base game. Thanks for listening to my TED talk on why Scatter sucks. This one will hurt me, okay? I still miss it to this day. Orisa got a major rework during the first beta of Overwatch 2, which moved her away from this stationary shield tank into a more versatile and a bit more mobile kit that better fit the world of a solo tank. Wait, we're releasing a tank for 5v5 with a stationary shield with 14 seconds of cooldown and no mobility? Can we revert Orisa already? Anyways, among the multiple removed abilities, the most unique and interesting one was Halt, a projectile that would suck people in that were close and in line of sight of the orb, indicated by these green lines, functionally essentially as a mini grab on a cooldown, which would solidify her role as a setup main tank for other heroes like Hog or Sigma to follow up with her less reliable CCs and one-shots, making them deadly bunker duos if you were coordinated, while still providing some selfish power as you could use it to guarantee some of your shots, especially if you launch them upwards as their movement would be limited while falling. Honestly, I have no idea why it was removed, outside maybe the logic of being too underwhelming without another tank to follow up, so it was instead replaced with Javelin Toss, which is better as an independent ability, but it's also a lot less unique and mostly used to just poke and abuse the enemy tank as it's pretty unreliable at range. This ability has come back in every Overwatch Classic event it's in, as well as being part of one of her stadium powers that pulls people in after a spear toss, which was usually one of the worst one, as it was really awkward to use, but received a significant buff recently, so it might actually be good now. I personally believe this ability just needs to come back, whether it is reverted to Orisa or given to a new hero, I don't care. But this style of team support abilities are scarce and would allow for more team play in a game that has been losing that aspect over time. Lastly, and certainly for least, we have a passive that lasted quite literally for 3 days before getting removed. If you didn't know, Lifeweaver release was the worst release in terms of power level in the history of Overwatch, and like by a mile. One of the reasons for it was the fact that when he died, he would drop a healing seed that acted as a health pack, and you would think, hey, how that's a bad thing, he dies but can still support his team one last time. Yeah, well, there is a small detail about it. It could be picked up by the enemy. Now, it did heal enemies for less, but like, why would you give a hero a passive that literally rewards the enemy flanker to focus on you on a support, which they should already do to begin with? Not only that, but since you just dropped it when you died, the enemy had a much higher chance to be close to it and pick it up, while your team just ignored it. Arguably the worst ability in terms of design in the history of Overwatch. Seems Shield at the very least wasn't a negative for you and your team. Funnily enough, it would come back as part of Life Cycle minor perk, but would no longer heal enemies. This perk was good, but not because of the healing seed that barely affected the game, as again, it's really uncommon for your team to walk backwards to where you died, unless you were coordinated. It was essentially replaced as, you guessed it, it was only picked for the self-healing aspect, which caused other problems for the hero, while the seed was not very functional. Death passives are already quite volatile and mostly useless in Overwatch, so I don't believe anyone truly wants it to be added back in the game, except the enemy Tracer, I guess. So, do you think Blizzard should bring back any of these abilities? Which one do you miss the most? I will make a part 2 eventually, so mention in the comments the removed ability you want me to talk about. That's all everyone, remember to leave a like and subscribe to see more content in the future, as well as checking out my channel if you want to see more videos like this one. See you next time.